أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا محمد بن عبد الله وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق وهو أصدق الصادقين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائمة قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على My respected elders, brothers, sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We concluded our discussion on the second step of opening our hearts to fall in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as being that of gratitude yesterday. We took a practical lesson from the biography of Satan, which Allah Himself writes for us in the Holy Quran. And our final conclusive remarks were that we should try and use that act that Satan was not able to bring himself to, which was the act of falling into prostration with Allah for the sake of Allah, to Allah, and thanking Him. And we also looked at ways in which Allah wants us to thank Him. Today we begin the next chapter in this journey, and it's quite clear from Surah Al-Jum'ah what exactly this is. That Allah demands from each and every one of us that we begin to break free from every other attachment aside from Him. He is Al-Mutakabbir, He doesn't share. So if you're attached to anything other than God, He doesn't want the action, He won't reward for the action, and He's not going to take a place in this heart. This heart has to be void of all other attachments in order to fall in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to set the scene of what Surah Al-Jum'ah says in these few verses. It's quite amazing as to what these people did. But what hurts is that we read this surah, we've read it probably 100 times, and we've probably heard it even more. But I wonder if anyone can even say and mention what exactly has happened in one of these final verses. Where Allah says, وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً, and when they saw trade, أو لهوا, or they saw amusement. وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً أَوْ لَهْوًا انفضوا إِلَيْهَا, they broke away from this gathering and they went towards it. وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا, O Prophet, they left you standing. قُلْ مَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, O Prophet, tell them what is with Allah خَيْرٌ مِّنَ اللَّهْوِ وَمِنَ التِّجَارَةِ, is better than trade and amusement. وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الرَّازِقِينَ, and Allah is the best of providers. We've all read this verse, and what does it mean? What does it mean that they left the Prophet standing? When did they leave the Prophet standing? What type of trade was it? What type of amusement was it that took them away? Doesn't it make us question as to what I've been doing with this book? If I've read this chapter and I've probably memorized it and I know this verse, then why is it that I don't know what's happened in this verse? Did I not stop at any point to say, hang on a second, this doesn't make sense to me? They left the Prophet standing. What does it mean they left him standing? Or did I just question and say, it doesn't make sense, but I'll continue with my life? And if that was the attitude, then this Quran isn't going to give me much guidance. I was really pleased to see that promo where it says that the children are being taught the language of the Quran. If we don't start at the youngest age, the next generation won't know this language. The next generation won't be able to pick up the Quran. It just takes one generation to change. If you change the next generation, that's it. They'll see the value and they'll teach their kids and job done. But the onus and the duty is on one group of people to stand up and say, we don't need to exert that much effort in learning your Urdu and your Gujarati, because by the next generation, pretty much everybody born in this country is not going to speak that language, or will speak the language, but will definitely speak English as well. So if I'm going to exert effort, and there's all great, it's great to learn a secondary language, whichever language it be, that we can communicate with elders, we can travel to our ancestry homeland and speak to people, that's great. But if you're going to exert effort in teaching a child a language, then let it be the language that God chose for His book. Because it's not going to only open up the book of God to them. Can you imagine every single prophetic tradition? Every single tradition from the Imams and the Prophets will be known by this child of yours firsthand without an interpreter. But it takes one generation to take the uphill task. If you take that difficult task, and if you use your wealth to bring it to you to home, or you send them to classes to learn this language, it'll take them maybe 5 years. It'll take them 10 years living in the West, not being able to speak it. 10 years of effort, but then you've changed a generation to come. When Ibrahim made a dua, he didn't just make it for his kids, did he? رَبِّ اجْعَلْنِي مُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ. Oh Allah, make me one who establishes prayer. Did it stop there? Did he say, وَمِنْ أَوْلَادِي, and from my children only? No. He cared about the generations to come. وَمِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي, my entire progeny, I want you to make them those individuals who establish the prayer. I'm not going to be short-sighted. I'm not just going to care what's happening when I'm alive in this community, or when my children, what I'm going to pass over to them. I care about the generations to come. I want to make an impact for years, for tens or thousands or hundreds of years that are going to come. I emphasized this yesterday in the Q&A, that we have to exert effort in learning this language, and I hope this is proof as to why. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً, that, O Prophet, when they saw, Prophet was giving a sermon. Prophet was giving Salatul Jum'ah sermon, and they saw trade, and they saw amusement, and something else happens, which we're about to explore. A few verses before, look at what these individuals are doing. Allah says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who believe. It's not just to those people, it's to you and me as well. إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمْعَةِ, if the call comes for the Friday prayer, what does God want us to do? فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Interesting usage of words. He didn't say, I want you just to come to the prayer. He says, فَاسْعَوْا. You remember when you go to Umrah or Hajj, you do sa'i? It's that striving that you do, the running that you do, the hurried walking that you do between Safa and Marwa. That's why it's called sa'i, because you're meant to strive for it. Allah is telling you and I that I want you to exert effort. فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Don't exert effort to come and listen to the Prophet, because this is not just about the Prophet. He'll be giving the sermon today, but when he dies, somebody else will be giving the sermon. So it's not about the Prophet here. Allah says, on the Friday, I want you to exert effort and come to the remembrance of Allah. And then he says, وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. He says, and I want you to let go, not of trade. He doesn't say, and I want you to let go of tijara. Tijara is used later on in this same chapter. It's only, 11 verses? Allah says, I want you to let go of the sale. Why does he say, I want you to let go of the sale? Not that I want you to let go of business or trade. Why sale specifically over here? And then later on it comes to trade. There's something in the sale which is so lucrative, is it not? If you're a one-handed, one-man band, and you have a business that you run everything, you are the salesperson, you are the accountant, you are the bookkeeper, you're the buyer, you're everything. What's the most lucrative part of that business? What is that one part of the business that you'll find most difficult to let go of when it comes to remembering God? If you're sitting there filling out some forms or making some payments, it'll be easy to let go of that because you really want to do the payment the next day. You'll try and delay. It's not urgent. But if somebody walks in and is about to make a great sale and is about to buy a large quantity of product, that's the test when you're about to make the sale. There's no point going into business if you don't know how to sell. Here, God is saying that when you're about to make that lucrative sale, that thing which is most closest to you in business, I want you to halt that, let go of it, drop it, and not just come to me. I want you to hurry up towards my remembrance. فَاسْعُوا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. Let go of your sale. ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. You think that your success and your flourishment and your blossoming of your business and your life and your household is in making that sale, right? Because man, you can only see what's tangible. God is saying, ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Letting go of that sale and coming to my remembrance is actually better for you. إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. If only you knew. Doesn't it show that when somebody listens to the command of God, that God will assist them in ways that they do not expect? In the Quran, many times God says that He'll give you rizq min haythu la tahtasib, from avenues that you least expected it. Any person who's worked in business will attest to the fact that sometimes you have no idea where this sale came from, but it came. Somebody referred someone and ended up with you. Or somebody lost the sale, it came to you. Or a customer just walks in. There's no such thing as coincidence in Islam. If Allah wants good for a person, He doesn't increase him in wealth, and He doesn't make them poor. He gives them that amount of wealth which will allow them to remember God. And He keeps them away from that amount of wealth which will make him forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now these people rush to the Prophet on Friday. They're sitting in front of the Prophet and they're listening to his khutbah. They're listening to him speak. Can you imagine standing or sitting rather in front of the Prophet listening to him talk? And all of a sudden they start hearing tambourines and they start hearing drums. And they hear the trumpet of what seems to be like an elephant, the noise of an elephant. Now this is an animal that is not common in Arabia. When they're hearing trumpets and they're hearing tambourines and drums, what do these people do? You would expect that you would be attached to the Holy Prophet. You're sitting right in front of him. Allah says, وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً. And as soon as they saw trade, the opportunity for trade, أَوْ لَهْوًا, or amusement, that means the businessmen and women amongst him, they said that this is an opportunity to network. There's a commodity that's come. There's a sale that I can make. They got up from sitting in front of the Prophet and they just left the mosque. And they went to that trade caravan. And there was a second group of people who weren't businessmen and women, and they just felt left out. And they said, you know what, if nothing else, there's an animal that I haven't seen in a while. Let me go and have a look at this elephant. So they got up as a second group and they left as well. وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا. Oh Prophet, they left you standing. Can you imagine the Prophet giving a sermon and all of a sudden flocks of people get up and just walk out? It makes you ask the question that, were these people attached to the religion and to God or not? The Prophet is standing in front of them, but they weren't attached to the Prophet. They had an attachment in their heart. An attachment is internal, it's not external. And the attachment was so strong that even when something was external, what was internal had a greater driving force. It's not the beauty of the mosque that makes one go astray because they fall in love with the architecture and the beauty. It's not the car, it's not the metal, it's not the house and the bricks and the mortar. All this is just the creation of God. It can't be evil and it can't be wrong. The attachment is inside man. We can have the same car, but I can be so attached to it and you use it for its purpose. There's a story of two monks, a master and his student. They were walking and the master was in silence. And as they walked past a small bridge and a woman was trying to fill her bucket of water and she slipped and she fell in. So the master quickly jumped in, picked up the woman, took her out, left her down, and continued walking with the student. After around 10-15 minutes, the student held the hand of the master. He said, "Master, you better stop. I can't hold it in anymore." He said, "Why? What happened?" He said, "You know we're not allowed to touch women. He said, you picked up that woman and you left her over there. How could you do that? The master said that I picked her up and I left her there. But you've picked her up and you've been carrying her since. That you've been attached to her in such a fashion that you're not able to let go of her right now. She's inside you to the extent that even what's outside doesn't make a difference to you. Attachments are inside the heart. They're not external. That's why when Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, when he went to the Kaaba once, and it was packed, at sometimes when the Prophet would go, as is mustahab, he'd go and he would kiss the Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone, and he'll touch it, and then he'll continue, and then he'll start his circumambulation of the Kaaba, the tawaf. There was a time when one of the Imams came and they didn't touch the black stone. And they just went around. So somebody came and asked him, but your grandfather used to touch the black stone. And he says, yes, because at that time when my grandfather used to come, people used to make way for him. But for me right now, to get to the black stone, now these are my words, it would require that the Imam either shoves somebody or pushes somebody or steps on somebody. And akhlaq comes before anything else. Stepping on somebody is going to cause someone else pain for my own selfish benefit of touching the black stone. So he didn't. At one point he had come for the Umrah or the Hajj, and there were so many people going around the Kaaba. And somebody comes to him and says, oh Imam, look at the beauty. How many hundreds of people have come to the Kaaba. There used to be a time when there were polytheists dancing around the Kaaba, semi-naked, without clothes. When the Prophet was able to come into Makkah and the Fath of Makkah happened, there were only a handful of people. Now there are hundreds of people going around the Kaaba. The Imam opens his two fingers and he says, look within. And the man sees that there is these animals moving around the Kaaba. So the Imam says, paraphrasing, As-Surah, Suratul Insan, Wal-Qalb, Qalbul Haywan. When you look at them, they look like human beings, men and women. But if only you could see their hearts and what they were attached to. The attachments within their hearts are so many. Everything but God. And that's why he says in the Quran, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Have you not seen the individual who's taken his base desires as God? Here Allah is showing us that even in front of the Prophet, standing with the Prophet, rubbing shoulders with the Prophet, listening to him doesn't make you a better person. If your attachment to other than God is so strong, you can even leave the Prophet standing. So Allah says, they left you standing. قُلْ مَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. Oh Prophet, tell them, what is with Allah? خَيْرٌ مِّنَ اللَّهْوِ وَمِنَ التِّجَارَةِ. It's better than amusement and tijara and trade. Did you notice something in this verse? So if you were paying attention, there's something that you would have noticed and it stood out like a sore thumb. And I'm sure if you sat down and looked at the wordings, it would come to light. But let's do it together. Listen to the verse again. وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً أَوْ لَهْوًا. O Prophet, when they saw trade or amusement, انفضوا إليها, they went towards it. Infaddu means to break off. They broke off from the gathering such that you can't mend it again. They've gone now, they're not coming back. وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً. When they saw trade or lahwan or amusement, they broke off and they went towards it and they left you standing. O Prophet, tell them what is with Allah is better than. You would expect that the same order of words would come. What is with Allah is better than trade and amusement. Because that's how the verse began. وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً أَوْ لَهْوًا. But here at the end of the verse, Allah says, O Prophet, tell them what is with Allah is better مِنَ اللَّهْوِ وَمِنَ التِّجَارَةِ. Is better than amusement and then trade. It's these small nuances in the Quran. When you see them, you ask yourself, why is it at the beginning of the verse, God said trade and amusement, but by the end of the verse, He says amusement and then trade? You can just read it and move past it. Or you can say, you know what, there's a reason, because my God is all wise. And if He's done something, it's not out of coincidence. He's telling me here, He's saying something to me, that for that group of people who were sitting there, what enticed them was trade first. The majority of them were businessmen or women. And so trade allured them, and this large group left who were amused by trade and networking, and a small group ran after them for amusement. But oh man, realize that that which pulls man away from God more than anything else is not trade. That's secondary. Firstly, it's amusement. And that's why he precedes it. That if you fall into laziness, if you don't have a goal in your life, if you're just running after the next thing that glitters, then you've fallen into this trap of amusement. Allah tells the Prophet, "O Ahmad," on the day on Mi'raj, he said, "O Ahmad, be wary of people who are simply taken away by anything which is green and yellow." Green meaning on earth, yellow meaning anything that the sun shines on. That anything that glitters, all of a sudden they're taken by it. There's this statement in English, isn't it? All that glitters is not gold. Just because something looks nice doesn't mean you have to add value to it and be attracted to it. If you and me are that type of people who fall into amusement, who prefer to sleep rather than being vigilant at night, who prefer to sleep rather than waking up early and going to work, who prefer to relax over exerting effort and learning even till our last breaths, and such a person, what is he doing in life? In Surah Yusuf, Allah tells us about this nafsul ammara. Nafsul ammara is a nafs that we all have. We all have one nafs, one soul. It has different levels and different ways of manifesting itself. Sometimes it's ammara. That's the lowest possible version. If somebody can't get rid of this, then they honestly haven't started this journey of purification to God. There's a nafs that Allah talks about in the Quran, lawama, the one that bites you. When you do and I do a sin, it hurts, it bites. If you listen to it, when it bites you, you won't do the sin a second time. It'll bite you once, twice, 50 times, 100 times. But if you keep ignoring it, you don't get hurt anymore when you do a sin. And that's why you can get people who are habitual sinners, habitual liars, for example. But in this verse in Surah Yusuf, Allah says, this nafsul ammara, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. Allah is giving you and I a hint. You want to get out of this nafsul ammara, this nafs that wants amusement? Say that I am not in control. I can't control this nafsul ammara that wants evil, illa ma rahima rabbi. I need assistance from God. In every step of life, if you think that you can accomplish something selflessly by yourself, independently of God, you'll fail. And that's why God tells us in Salah, that I want you to say it every time you pray, بِحَوْلِ اللَّهِ وَقُوَّتِهِ أَقُومُ وَأَقْعُدْ. That even when I stand and I sit, I don't do it by my own two legs, I do it by the permission of God. As I conclude, take this as an analogy of this heart, and then we'll discuss from tomorrow how exactly we sever our attachments which are not godly. The word in Arabic for heart is qalb. Normally, when you look at a word in Arabic, especially if God has used it, the root meaning will give you some insight into that word or into that limb or into that action. For example, zakat. Zakat, we know, is a tax, is a charity that we give. But you look into the meaning, and what root letters does it come from? It comes from the same root letters as tazkiyah, of purification. And you find that's what zakat does. Charity, what does it do? It purifies your soul, it purifies your wealth. That's the whole point of charity. When it comes to qalb, what are the three root letters of qalb? Qala and ba. Qalaba in Arabic means to flip. You know when you take a goldfish out of water, if you've ever had fish, you take them out to clean the water, what happens to the fish? It starts flipping left and right, uncontrollably. Allah is saying, this is what happens to your heart. Don't expect your heart to go on a trajectory like this, that it's always going to get closer to God. There are going to be times when you'll have turbulent times, you'll come up and down. You're meant to do that. That's what the heart is meant to do. Sometimes you feel distant from God. Sometimes you feel close to Him. Why does He make you feel distant? So that you appreciate the times when you get closer to Him. And you don't take it for granted. The next time you feel close to God, you make the most of that time that you're with Him. Allah says this heart that is flipping left and right, it's got too many attachments. It needs to settle down. The analogy is of a room. If you enter a room and there's birds flying around and you want to get rid of every attachment, every single bird, you're not going to be able to scream and shout. You're not going to be able to catch one bird. It'll be difficult. The first thing you need to do is tranquilize everything in that room. You need to bring about calmness and order to everything in that room. Every attachment needs to become tranquil, calm, and then one by one you can begin to sever it. You've noticed in the last 15, 20 years that there's such a movement, even in Western society, towards what's known as spirituality. But nobody really knows this path of spirituality. You'll find a charlatan cropping up from somewhere and taking money from people, saying that I can help you meditate and make you still and take you closer to God. And that individual ends up molesting people and going to jail. You have another individual who crops up and ends up committing fraud and they go to jail. My first question would be, is if you see a need for spirituality and you realize that it's all got to do with the heart and not got to do with the body, then why not come to the creator of the heart and ask him how I bring stillness and calmness to my heart? There's nothing wrong in looking at different sciences. Imam Ali says that knowledge is the lost property of the believer. Take it from whoever you want. Filter it out. Read different books. People of different religion. People of no religion. You can still learn from them. Like I said yesterday, God says, I'll teach you from Satan himself. But when you want to get closer to God, why explore all these avenues that have some amount of good? Shouldn't the first step be to come to the creator of the heart and ask him, what brings tranquility and calmness to my heart? And if you open up the Quran, Allah says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believe, وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, and they find contentment in the remembrance of God. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. He says, definitely, there's no two questions about it, that if you want tranquility in your heart, it's only going to come by you and me remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, in our discussion from tomorrow for the next few days, I want to explore attachments that we have and how to not necessarily sever them off. There are some attachments we have to sever off because they take the better of us. But there are some attachments which are only ungodly if we look at it through the wrong perspective. Right? If I work for the sake of earning money only, then that's an attachment to this dunya. How is it that Sulaiman had the entire kingdom but wasn't attached to it? But the Prophet had to give away all his wealth and all of Khadija's wealth. Normally when you talk to a businessman or businesswoman and they are extremely wealthy and they're working hard and you tell them that should you truly be extravagant to this degree, do you not think it's extravagance? The one example they give you is of Sulaiman. I say, well, if Sulaiman could accumulate everything, then that shows that it's not wrong. My knee-jerk reaction to that would be there were 124,000 prophets, out of which one was Sulaiman. It shows you how difficult it is to have wealth and yet not be attached to it. He loved horses as per the Quran. This man had control over the wind. It could take him the journey of a month in a night. This man had jinn under his control, as the Quran says, to the extent that he would command them. They would be so fearful of his command, they would dive to the depths of the sea and bring out pearls. Allah says He made them builders. They built structures for him. Sulaiman didn't have his wealth because he was attached to the dunya. It was because God gave him these abilities and these miracles and these powers. He needed it at his time. And then you come to Amirul Mu'mineen, a man who is dressed in a way where his clothes are torn and he patches them up himself. A man whose physical body didn't allow him to even break bread. He had to use his knee. There was one Sulaiman. But for the majority of people, the dunya outside, it's easy to become attached to it in a fashion that is not beneficial. That doesn't mean don't work. It doesn't mean don't work hard. To the contrary, the Prophet became the best salesman that there was. Imam Ali became the best judge that there was. But within certain moral conditions and a framework. I leave you with this tradition and then we begin to explore attachments tomorrow. Isa alayhi salam says that I saw a beautiful woman from a distance. And so as I approached her, It seems to be a vision. He says, as I approached her, I realized that she was extremely ugly. From a distance, she looked beautiful. As I came close, I found out she was extremely ugly. So I asked her, Kam tazawwajti? How many have you married? And she says, plentiful. And then he said, and how many have you divorced? She said, none. Rather, I've killed them all. So he says, and who are you? And she says, I am the dunya. If somebody gets attached to me, it's extremely difficult for them to let go. And that's why, in Sharia, that if a man marries a woman marries a man, when a divorce takes place, if a divorce takes place 3 times, you cannot remarry that woman, the woman cannot remarry the man unless she now marries another man and the marriage is consummated. So on a 3rd divorce, there's no way of coming back together until she now marries and consummates her marriage with another man. That's why Imam Ali says, Talaqtu, I have divorced, not dunya. He says, I have divorced your dunya 3 times. Not my dunya. There's a dunya that Imam Ali lived in, that he said is the plantation for the next life. But it depends how you attach yourself to what's around you. If you attach it through the lens of God, it's beneficial and becomes Sulaiman. But if you attach yourself even to your own existence, then one becomes Iblis, where he turns around and tells God, you created me of fire. He was so attached to his own existence, his own physical being, that he says, I'm fire and he's clay. And that's why I'm not going to move down in worship. With regards to Surah Al-Jumu'ah, if you don't mind me just concluding, many a times women sometimes read traditions and it says that it's better for a woman to pray salah at home and not come to a mosque. That was for the time when women coming to the mosque where they wouldn't have a place to pray in the mosque. If you look at the mosque of the Prophet and the first mosque in Islam, they were just 4 walls. The height of the wall was the height of the minaret, and Bilal would stand on the minaret. So if you take the average height of a man, a tall man, 6 foot, the wall would have been 6 foot maximum, the minaret would have been 6 foot. And Bilal would climb 6 foot high and stand on that minaret, maybe even slightly lower. With just 4 walls, the segregation in salah was difficult. Not segregation in the sense that men and women couldn't stand back and forth, they could. But what if all of a sudden an entourage of men came into the mosque? What if all of a sudden a caravan, a trade caravan came in and now men entered the mosque and now they couldn't pray because women were there at the same time? According to Sharia, women are meant to take a step back from that line to make another line for the men, and the men can come in front. All of this had its practical difficulties. Sayyid Sistani says that was at the time of the Prophet, but if now there is place that women can come and pray comfortably, then the emphasis is that women come to the mosque as well. So that verse of Surah Al-Jumu'ah that says, وَذَرُوا الْبَيْءِ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, that hurry up and strive and come to the remembrance of God and leave your business and your sale, is as applicable for the men as it is for the women. Inshallah, we can begin our discussion tomorrow on attachments to see how we sever off from some and how we change our perspective on attachments on others. وآخر الدعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.